if you haven't been here before, you usually can't hear me this well. This is terribly intimate, isn't it? But in this age of extinct intimacy, I thought I'd bring you my voice, but a little bit closer. Now, like any sane white middle-class feminist, I have been thinking about the Greta Gerwig adaptation of Little Women ever since it came out. And I was also thinking about this absurd assumption I had when I went to see it in the cinema. Not that the preceding 2020 would proceed as 2019 had, with, I don't know, access to cinemas and bookshops and normal smelling moisturiser. Is that a me issue? It's a me issue. The only moisturiser I have left is self-tanner that smells like biscuits. Please send help. But under the assumption that I had read Little Women, I haven't. I think it was about half an hour into the film where I looked at the screen and I was like, yeah, I fully have never read this. And I'd definitely seen the adaptation with Winona Ryder when I was a kid, but it dawned on me that if I had read it, it had been an insanely abbreviated version that was probably laminated from a school library, and I definitely hadn't done this with the text. I hadn't really got my face in it. And I thought, what better time to pick up this stonkingly long novel than during a time when I can't leave my flat? Because if there's anything that comforts me as a woman, it's reading about other women who are also trapped. If you've been on this channel for a long time, you might remember that I did start a series where I read aloud to you. I'm nothing if not slow but firm in keeping my promises. So today I'm going to read to you a little bit from Little Women by Lousia May Alcott. This is my edition. It's very pretty. I bought it for aesthetics alone, but apparently now we're going to use it for its original intention, which was to be read. I was also recently listening to an incredible interview with Greta Gerwig, who wrote the screenplay. I think I kind of grew up thinking that the book was about sisters, about sisterly love, about romantic love and how you find it. And watching that film, I realised I was incredibly wrong, and the way she articulated in this interview was really great. She was just like, this film is about women and money. It's about how women acquire money, the ways that they can't acquire money, and what happens to that money and what happens to the rest of the areas of their life, like their art and their relationships and their futures because of their access to money. And I was like, sold. So without further ado, I'm going to start, because why not? If you'd like to follow along on your hymn books, we're going to be starting on page 1. God, there is part of me that would really thrive as a Presbyterian minister. Apologies for the fact that I have a British accent, but trust me, you don't want to hear any of my other accents. We're trying to create world peace here, guys, not set it back. Okay, chapter 1, Playing Pilgrims. Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, grumbled Jo, lying on the rug. It is so dreadful to be poor, sighed Meg, looking down at her old dress. Well, I don't think it's fair. Some girls get to have lots of pretty things and other girls nothing at all, added little Amy with an injured sniff. We've got father and mother and each other, anyhow, said Beth, contented from her corner. The 4 young faces on which the firelit shone brightened at the cheerful words, but darkened again as Jo said sadly, We haven't got father, and shall not have him for a long time. She didn't say, perhaps never, but each silently added it, thinking of father far away where the fighting was. Nobody spoke for a minute, then Meg said in an altered tone, You know the reason Mother promised not to have any presents this Christmas was because it's going to be a hard winter for everyone. She thinks we ought not to spend money for pleasure when our men are suffering so in the army. We can't do much, but we can make our little sacrifices and ought to do it gladly. But I'm afraid I don't, and Meg shook her head, and she thought regretfully of all the pretty things she wanted. But I don't think the little we should spend would do any good. We've each got $1, and the army wouldn't be helped by our giving that. I agree not to expect anything from Mother or you, but I do want to buy Erdene and Stringham for myself. I've wanted it so long, said Jo, who was a bookworm. I plan to spend mine on new music, said Beth, with a little sigh, which no one heard but the hearth brush and the kettle holder. I shall get a nice box of Faber's drawing pencils. I really need them, said Amy decidedly. Well, Mother didn't say anything about our money. She won't wish us to give up everything. Let's each buy what we want and have a little fun. I'm sure we grub hard enough to earn it, cried Jo, examining the heels of her shoes in a gentlemanly manner. I know I do, teaching those dreadful children nearly all day when I'm longing to enjoy myself at home, began Meg, in the complaining tone again. You don't have half as such a hard time as I do, said Joe. How would you like to be shut up for hours with a nervous, fussy old lady who keeps you trotting, is never satisfied, and worries you till you're ready to fly out of the window or box her ears? It's naughty to fret, but I do think washing dishes and keeping things tidy is the worst work in the world. It makes me cross. My hands get so stiff I can't practice a good bit. And Beth looked at her rough hands with a sigh that anyone could hear that time. I don't believe any of you suffer as I do, cried Amy, for you don't have to go to school with impertinent girls who plague you if you don't know your lessons and laugh at your dresses and label your father if he isn't rich and insult you when your nose isn't nice. If you meant libel, I'd say so and not talk about labels as if Pa was a pickle bottle, advised Joe, laughing. I know what I mean, and you shouldn't be satirical about it. It's proper to use good words and improve your vocabulary, returned Amy with dignity. Oh, don't peck at one another, children. Don't you wish we had the money Pa lost when we were little, Joe? Dear me, how happy and good we'd be if we had no worries, said Meg, who could remember better times. You said the other day you thought we were a deal happier than the King children, for they were fighting and fretting all the time in spite of their money. So I did, Beth. Well, I think we are. For though we do have to work, we make fun for ourselves, and are a pretty jolly set, as Joe would say. Joe does use slang words, observed Amy with a reproving look at the long figure stretching out on the rug. Joe immediately sat up, put her hands in her apron pockets, and began to whistle. Oh, Joe, don't. It's so boyish. That's why I do it. I detest rude, unladylike girls. I hate affected, niminy-piminy chits. Birds in their little nests agree, sang Beth, the peacemaker, with such a funny face that both sharp voices softened to a laugh and the pecking ended for that time. Really, girls, you are both to be blamed, said Meg, beginning to lecture in her elder sister fashion. You were old enough to leave off boyish tricks and behave better, Josephine. It didn't matter so much when you were a little girl, but now you are so tall and you turn up your hair and you should remember that you are a young lady. I ain't, and if turning up my hair makes me one, I'll wear it in 2 tails till I'm 20, cried Joe, pulling off her net, shaking down her chestnut mane. I hate to think I've got to grow up and be Miss March, wear long gowns and look prim as a China racer. What the hell is that? It's bad enough to be a girl anyway, when I like boys' games and work and manners. I can't get over my disappointment in not being a boy. It's worse than ever now, for I'm dying to go and fight with Papa, and I can only stay home and knit like a poky old woman. And Joe shook the blue army sock till the needles rattled like castanets, and her ball bounced across the room. Poor Joe, it's not so bad. It can't be helped, so you must try to be contented with making your name boyish and playing brothers to us girls, said Beth, stroking the rough head at her knee with a hand that all the dishwashing and dusting in the world could not make ungentle in its touch. As for you, Amy, continued Meg, you are altogether too particular and prim. Your airs are funny now, but you'll grow up to be an affected little goose if you don't take care. I like your nice manners and refined ways of speaking, when you don't try to be elegant, but your absurd words are as bad as Joe's slang. If Joe is a tomboy and Amy is a goose, what am I, please? Asked Beth, ready to share the lecture. You're a dear and nothing else, answered Meg warmly, and no one contradicted her, for the mouse was the pet of the family. As young readers like to know how people look, we will take this moment to give them a little sketch of the 4 sisters who sat knitting away in the twilight while the December snow fell quietly without. The fire crackled cheerfully within. It was a comfortable old room, and the carpet was faded and the furniture very plain. For a good picture or two hung on the walls, books filled the recess, chrysanthemums and Christmas roses blossomed in the windows, and a pleasant atmosphere of home peace pervaded it. Margaret, the eldest of the 4, was 16 and very pretty, being plump and fair with large eyes, plenty of soft brown hair, a sweet mouth and white hands of which she was rather vain. 15-year-old Jo was very tall, thin, and brown, and reminded one of a colt, for she never seemed to know what to do with her long limbs, which were very much in the way. She had a decided mouth, a comical nose, and sharp grey eyes, which appeared to see everything, and were by turns fierce, funny, or thoughtful. Her long, thick hair was her one beauty. but it was usually bundled in a net to be out of the way. Rounded shoulders had Jo, big hands and feet, and a flyaway look to her clothes, and the uncomfortable appearance of a girl who was rapidly shooting up to be a woman and didn't like it. Elizabeth, or Beth as everyone called her, was a rosy, smooth-haired, bright-eyed girl of 13, with a shy manner and a timid voice, and a peaceful expression, which was seldom disturbed. Her father called her Little Tranquillity, and the name suited her elegantly, for she seemed to live in the happy world of her own, only venturing out to meet the few who she trusted and loved. Amy, the youngest, was a most important person, in her own opinion at least. A regular snow maiden with blue eyes, yellow hair curling on her shoulders, pale and slender, and always carrying herself like a lady, mindful of her manners. What the characters of the four sisters were, we will leave to be found out. My wrist! I regret picking such a heavy book, my wrist really hurts. The clock struck 6, and having swept up the hearth, Beth put a pair of slippers down to warm. Somehow the sight of the old shoes had a good effect upon the girls, for Mother was coming and everyone brightened to welcome her. Meg stopped lecturing and lit the lamp. Amy got out the easy chair without being asked, and Jo forgot how tired she was as she sat up to hold the slippers near to the blaze. They are worn out. Marmee must have a new pair. I thought I'd get her some with my $1, said Beth. No, I shall, cried Amy. I'm the oldest, began Meg, but Jo cut in with a decided, I am the man of the family now Papa is away, and I shall provide the slippers, for he told me to take special care of Mother while he was gone. I tell you what we'll do, said Beth. Let's each get her something for Christmas and not get anything for ourselves. That's like you, dear. That's like you, dear. What will we get? Exclaimed Jo. Everyone thought soberly for a minute, then Jo announced, as if an idea was suggested by the sight of her own pretty hands. I shall give her a nice pair of gloves. Army shoes, best to be had, cried Jo. Some handkerchiefs, all hemmed, said Beth. I'll get her a little bottle of cologne. She likes it and it won't cost much. I'll have some left to buy something for me, added Amy. How will we give the things? Asked Meg. Put them on the table, bring her in and see her open the bundles? Don't you remember how we used to do it on our birthdays? Answered Jo. I used to be so frightened when it was my turn to sit in the big chair with the crown on, see you all come in marching round to give the presents with a kiss. I liked the things and the kisses, but it was dreadful to have you sit looking at me while I opened the bundles, said Beth, who was toasting her face and the bread for tea at the same time. Let Marmee think we're getting things for ourselves and then surprise her. We must go shopping tomorrow afternoon, Meg. There's lots of things to do about the play for the Christmas night, said Jo, marching up and down with her hands behind her back, her nose in the air. I don't mean to act any more after this time. I'm getting too old for such things, observed Meg, who was as much a child as ever about dressing up frolics. You won't stop, I know, as long as you can trail around in a white gown with your hair down and wear a gold paper jewellery. You are the best actress we've got, and there'll be an end to everything if you quit the boards, said Jo. We ought to rehearse tonight. Come here, Amy, and do some fainting scene, for you are as stiff as a poker in that. I can't help it. I've never seen anyone faint, and I couldn't choose to make myself all black and blue, tumbling flat as you do. If I can go down easily, I'll drop. If I can't, I shall fall into a chair and be graceful. I don't care if Hugo comes to me with a pistol, turned Amy, who was not gifted with dramatic power, but was chosen because she was small enough to be borne out shrieking by the hero of the piece. Do it this way. Clasp your hands so, and stagger across the room, crying frantically, Rodrigo, save me, save me. And away went Jo with a melodramatic scream which was truly thrilling. Amy followed, but she poked her hands out stiffly before her and jerked herself as if she went by machinery, and her ow was more suggestive of pins being run into her than of fear and anguish. Jo gave a despairing groan, and Meg laughed out loud, while Beth let her bread burn as she watched the fun with interest. It's no use. Do the best you can when the time comes, and if the audience shout, don't blame me. Come on, Meg. Then things went smoothly, for Don Pedro defied the world in a speech of 2 pages without a single break. Hagar the witch chanted an awful incantation over her kettle full of simmering toads with weird effect. Rodrigo rent his trains asunder manfully, and Hugo died in agonies of remorse and arsenic with a wild ha ha. It's the best we've ever done yet, said Meg, as the dead villain sat up and rubbed his elbows. I don't see how you can write and act such splendid things, Joe. You're a regular Shakespeare, exclaimed Beth, who firmly believed that her sisters were gifted with wonderful genius in all ways. Not quite, replied Joe modestly. I do think The Witch's Curse and operatic tragedy is a rather nice thing, but I'd like to try Macbeth if we only had a trapdoor for Barak. I only wanted to do the killing part. Is that a dagger I see before me? Muttered Jo, rolling her eyes and clutching at the air as if she had seen a famous tragedian do. No, it's the toasting fork with Ma's shoe on it instead of the bread. Beth's stage struck, cried Meg, and the rehearsal ended with a general burst of laughter. Glad to find you so merry, my girls, said a cheerful voice at the door, and the actors and audience turned to welcome a stout, motherly lady with a "Can I help you?" look about her, which was truly delightful. She wasn't a particularly handsome person, but mothers are always lovely to their children, and the girls thought the grey cloak and unfashionable bonnet covered the most splendid woman in the world. Well, dearies, how have you got on today? There was so much to do getting boxes ready to go tomorrow that I didn't come home to dinner. Has anyone called, Beth? How's your colt, Meg? Joe, you look tired to death. Come and kiss me, baby. While making these material inquiries, Mrs. March got her wet things off, her hot slippers on, and, sitting down in the easy chair, drew Amy into her lap, preparing to enjoy the happiest hour of her busy day. The girls flew about, trying to make things comfortable, each in her own way. Meg arranged the tea table, Jo brought wood and set chairs, dropping, overturning and clattering everything she touched. Beth trotted to and fro between parlour and kitchen, quiet and busy, while Amy gave directions to everyone as she sat with her hands folded. As they gathered about the table, Mrs. March said with a particularly happy face, "I've got a treat for you after supper." A quick, bright smile went round like a streak of sunshine. Beth clapped her hands, regardless of the hot biscuit she held, and Jo tossed up her napkin, crying, "A letter! A letter! 3 cheers for father!" Yes, a nice long letter. He is well, and he thinks he shall get to the cold season better than we feared. He sends all sorts of loving wishes for Christmas, and a special message for you girls, said Mrs. March, patting her pocket as if she had got a treasure there. "Oh, hurry and get done. Don't stop to quirk your little finger and prick over your plate, Amy," cried Jo, choking on her tea, dropping her bread butter side down on the carpet in her haste to get to the treat. Beth ate no more, but crept away to sit in her shadowy corner and brood over the delight to come, until the others were ready. "I think it was so splendid of father to go as a chaplain when he was too old to be drafted and not strong enough for a soldier," said Meg warmly. "Don't I wish I could go as a drummer, a Vivian, what's his name, or a nurse? I could be near him and help him," exclaimed Jo with a groan. "It must be very disagreeable to sleep in a tent, eat all sorts of bad-tasting things and drink out of a tin mug," sighed Amy. "When will he get to come home, Marmee?" asked Beth with a little quiver in her voice. "Not for many months, dear, unless he is sick. He will stay and do his work faithfully as long as he can, and we won't ask for him to be back a minute sooner than he can be spared. Now come and hear the letter." They all drew to the fire, Mother in the big chair with Beth at her feet, Meg and Amy perched on either side of the chair, Jo leaning on the back, where no one would see any sign of emotion in the letter, should it happen to be touching. Very few letters were written in those hard times that were not touching, especially those with fathers sent home. In this one, little was said of the hardships endured, the dangers faced, or the homesickness conquered. It was a cheerful, hopeful letter, full of lively descriptions of camp life, marches and military news. And only in the end did the writer's heart overflow with fatherly love and longing for the little girls at home. "Give them all my dear love and a kiss. Tell them I think of them by day, pray for them by night, and find my best comfort in their affection at all times. A year seems a very long time to wait before I see them, but remind them that while we wait, we may all work, so that these hard days need not be wasted. I know they will remember what I said to them, that they will be loving children to you, will do their duty faithfully, fight their bosom enemies bravely, and conquer themselves so beautifully that when I come back to them I will be fonder and prouder than ever of my little women." Everybody sniffed when they came to that part. Jo wasn't ashamed of the great tear that dropped off the end of her nose, and Amy never minded the rumpling of her curls as she hid her face in her mother's shoulder and sobbed out, "I am a selfish pig, but I'll truly try to be better, so he might not be disappointed in me by and by." We all will, cried Meg. I think too much of my looks and hate to work, but won't anymore, not if I can help it. I'll try and be what he loves to call me, a little woman, and not be rough and wild, but do my duty here instead of wanting to be somewhere else, said Jo, thinking that keeping her temper at home was a much harder task than facing a rebel or two down south. Beth said nothing but wiped away a tear with a blue army sock and began to knit with all her might, losing no time in doing the duty that lay nearest to her, while she resolved in her quiet little soul to be all that father hoped to find when the year brought round the happy coming home. Mrs. March broke the silence that followed Jo's words by saying in a cheery voice, "Do you remember how you used to play Pilgrim's Progress when you were little things? Nothing delighted you more than having me tie my pierced bags on your backs for burden, give you hats and sticks, rolls of paper, and let you travel through the house from the cellar, which was the city of destruction, up, into the housetop where you had all the lovely things you could collect to make a celestial city." Oh, what fun it was, especially going by the lions, fighting Apocalypse, passing through the valleys where the hobgoblins were, said Jo. I like the place where the bundles fell off and tumbled downstairs, said Meg. My favourite part was when we came out on the flat roof where our flowers and arbours and pretty things were, and all stood and sung for joy up there in the sunshine, said Beth, smiling as if that pleasant moment had come back to her. I don't remember much about it, except I was afraid of the cellar and the dark entry and always liked the cake and the milk we had at the top. If I wasn't too old for such things, I'd rather like to play it over again, said Amy, who began to talk of renouncing childish things at the mature age of 12. We never are too old for those things, my dear, because it is a play. We are playing all the time, one way or another. Our burdens are here, our road is before us, and the longing for goodness and happiness is the guide that leads us through many troubles and mistakes to the peace, which is the true citadel city. Now, my little pilgrims, suppose you begin again, not in play, but in earnest, and see how far on you can get before father comes home. Really, mother? Where are our bundles? Asked Amy, who was a very literal young lady. Each of you told what your burden was just now, except Beth. I rather think she hasn't got any, said her mother. Yes, I have. Mine is dishes and dusters and envying girls with nice pianos and being afraid of people. Beth's bundle was such a funny one that everybody wanted to laugh, but nobody did, for it would have hurt her feelings very much. Let us do it, said Meg thoughtfully. It is only another name for trying to be good, and the story may help us. For though we do want to be good, it's hard and we forget, and we don't do our best. We were in the Slough of Despond tonight, and Mother came and pulled us out as Help did in the book. We ought to have our roles directed like Christian. What shall we do about that? Asked Jo, delighted with the fancy that lent a little romance to the very dull task of doing her duty. Look under your pillows on Christmas morning and you will find your guidebook, replied Mrs. March. They talked over the new plan, while old Hannah cleared the table. Then out came the 4 work baskets, and the needles flew as the girl made sheets for Aunt March. It was uninteresting sewing, but tonight no one grumbled. They adopted Jo's plan of dividing the long seams into 4 parts, calling the quarters Europe, Asia, Africa and America, and in that way got on capitally, especially when they talked about the different countries as they stitched their way through them. At 9 they stopped work and sung, as usual, before they went to bed. No one but Beth could get much music out of the old piano, but she had a way of softly touching the yellow keys and making a pleasant accompaniment to the simple songs they sung. Meg had a voice like a flute, and she and her mother led the little choir. Amy chirped like a cricket, and Jo wandered through the airs at her own sweet will, always coming out at the wrong place, with a crook or a quaver that spoilt the most pensive tune. They had always done this from the time they could lisp, crinkle, crinkle, little star, and it had become a household custom, for the mother was a born singer. The first sound in the morning was her voice as she went about the house singing like a lark, and the last sound at night was the same cheery sound, for the girls never grew too old for that familiar lullaby. And that was the end of chapter 1. That was very sweet. Definitely the kind of wholesome writing we deserve right now. I kind of realised that there was like a kind of parallel with lockdown times, because the whole like not being able to see your close family and them sending you like letters and being like, just remember what I taught you, remember how to keep it together and win the battle against yourself, which I thought was like a really interesting quote. We may all work so that these hard days need not be wasted. They will be loving children to you, will do their duty faithfully, fight their bosom enemies bravely, and conquer themselves so beautifully that when I come back to them I will be fonder and prouder than ever of my little women. That he kind of isn't just like talking about war and how it's great and how they're going to defeat the enemy. He writes to his girls who are stuck indoors and stuck outside of the action and being like, remember, the biggest war you're going to fight is with yourself. Are you winning? So I thought that was really cool. And I also just liked how Louisa May Alcott wasn't like, so here are the 4 girls and here are all of their very strict and clear characteristics. She was like, and their characters will be revealed in time. So while we do have this idea of what the 4 girls are like and what they want and how they act, it's made clear in the first chapter that it's not really about whether they're these clear personality types like Hogwarts houses, but it's more what their burden is, what they carry, what's the thing that gets in the way of them being themselves, and they've all got a different vice. Although we don't vibe with the emphasis on ladylike, calm down everybody, leave Jo alone. I also really liked all of the allusions to play and role play and how they were likening themselves to different characters in books, and I think that's what you do as a child naturally, but it's a good a literary device as well to show how many roles these kids want to play and how they're not really solid humans yet. They're still working it out and trying out different tragedies and dramatic things that aren't really happening to them, which I think is quite cool. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that and it created some kind of small distraction in your life. Have you guys read Little Women? You probably have. You're probably a lot cooler than me. If you'd like me to read another chapter of Little Women, let me know. If you'd like me to read another public domain work, let me know. Public domain is when we all own it. It is public. This is now the public's. It is owned by humanity. Very exciting. I love a good socialist art law, if a little extended and old. I hope you're doing okay wherever you are and whatever battle with yourself you are fighting. Thank you so much for watching. You can click up here for more bookish videos. You can click down here if you haven't been here before and would like to find yourself here again. If you're a fan of these videos and you'd like to be part of the beautiful group of people who make them possible, you can look into joining the Gumption Club for as little as $1 per thing, or even $1 per month if you'd like to cap it. Keep being your own little woman, and I'll see you in my next one. Frog Snug out.